List of illustrations. Caesarea Philippi, page 416. The ancient Pan city was named in honor of Tiberius Caesar by Herod Philip, who added his own name to that of the emperor. It was a place of idolatrous worship from the most ancient times, and there are shrines near the Jordan source now. This fountain is one of the largest in Syria. The ruins of the town are on a hill a little east of the fountain. The ruins of the castle are on the hill above the fountain, and among them are some beveled stones which indicate a Phoenician origin. Mount Hermon, page 428, said Dr. Van Dyck of Beirut, Syria, is a beautiful sight from every side, wherever visible, near or afar off. Its summit is crowned with perpetual snow, and its lower slopes are clothed with forests. The summer sun melts the snow from the crests of the ridges, leaving it in the deep ravines, where it appears like long white lines at a distance, and has been compared to the white locks of an old man. The name Jebel Ashake means the chief mountain, a title which every traveler gives it spontaneously. It may be seen from the hills a few miles north of Jerusalem, and from any part of the country north of that, and also from the heights of Moab. Its height is a little less than 10,000 feet, but as it stands alone and separated by several miles from any other high range, it appears even more majestic and lofty than Lebanon itself, which is higher. Whether this mountain or its slope near Paneas, Caesarea Philippi, was the scene of the transfiguration of Jesus has not been determined, but the common consent of many writers on the subject has connected its name with that event, and the only other locality, Mount Tabor, which at one time was thought to have been the scene, is now almost entirely rejected, partly because Josephus gives an account of a Roman fort on its summit, the foundations of which are still traceable. Now, we talk about transfiguration. Certain things can happen on different levels too. There can be psychic and spiritual occurrences, and the perception of one isn't necessarily what's going on in the other. It's going on in them and their reaction to. But Joppa, page 444. This was the only part of Judea, and from the earliest times has been subject to danger, having been taken by armies, sacked, burnt, and rebuilt many times. Nearly every ancient nation of Europe and Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, and Egypt has had a hand in making the history of Joppa. The present city is but little more than 125 years old. Some of the residents remembering the time when there was not more than a dozen houses in the town, and the present number of people is about 16,000. Soap is the leading manufacture. Fruit and silk are exported in large quantities. The landing of the shipping is made very dangerous by rocks, especially in windy weather, and even steamers are often compelled to go on to Haifa, nearly 60 miles away to the north. The rocks which lie just outside the inner harbor are famous in the works of the ancient historians and poets as the monster which devoured Andromeda and was killed by Perseus. They still devour many boats and even large ships with all their cargoes, and sometimes also their passengers. The gardens around Joppa are famous for most excellent fruits, probably because the whole plain is percolated by the waters from the hills, and which may be drawn up in every garden from a few feet deep. The followers of tradition show a grave of Dorcas and a house of Simon the Tanner. The tanneries are a little south of the city, where they probably have been from the earliest and were in Peter's time. The route for the railroad from Joppa to Jerusalem has been surveyed, following very closely the ancient summer road of Solomon's time. It will seem almost a sacrilege to ask for tickets for Jerusalem and for tickets for Bethlehem after the ages of weary climbing of pilgrims, mostly on foot, over the steep, rocky hills. Siloam, page 454. This pool is one of the very few localities in and around Jerusalem that is not disputed, and its Arabic name, Siloam, is almost identical with the Hebrew Shilawach, or Siloah. It is near the junction of the Tyro Poeon Valley with Kidron. The reservoir is 53 feet long by 18 wide and 19 deep. The water flows from the Virgin Fountain and did formerly from other city pools, underground to Siloam, with an ebb and flow dependent on the supply of water being more frequent in the rainy season. There is another pool a short distance below this, which is nearly 5 times the size of Siloam, and it's called the Birkat El Hambra, and maybe the Solomon's Pool of Josephus, and the King's Pool of Nehemiah, chapter 2, verse 14. Jewish tradition makes Gihon and Siloam one and the same pool. The village of Siloam, seen in the view of the Kidron Valley, page 629, is apparently a number of tomb dwellings. Sanhedrin, page 455. The Supreme Council of the Jews, composed of 71 members who represented the 12 tribes, consisting of chief priests, the heads of the 24 classes of priests, the elders, men of age and experience and honor, the scribes and the doctors, an order of men learned in the sacred law. The president, Nazi, chief, was generally the high priest, although chosen by vote lot. Well, Nazi also means overseer, and sat in the center of the semicircle. Noon, Sade, Yud, sat in the center of the semicircle on an elevated divan, and the vice president at his right hand. 2 scribes acted as secretaries. The room in which they met was called Gazeth, and was at one time in the southeast corner of the group of buildings around the temple. It also met, according to Matthew 26:3, in the residence of the high priest. They sat every day from the morning sacrifice to the evening sacrifice, except the Sabbath, when they instructed the people by lectures. The Sanhedrin, after the destruction of Jerusalem, 68 to 80 of the Common Era, met at Jumnil, under the Rabbi Zakkai, after being transferred back and forth 2 or 3 times between Jebna and Asha, was finally located at Tiberias, 193 of the Common Era, where it retained its name until about the year 300, where it lost its particular hold on the Jewish mind and became a consistory only, and in 425 of the Common Era finally closed its sittings. The 70 appointed by Jesus took the place in the new church of the Sanhedrin in the old economy, as the 12 apostles answered to the 12 tribes of Israel, Matthew 19:28 and Luke 22:30. If Moses was the real founder of the Sanhedrin, it had a continuous history for 19 centuries. The only legal modes of punishing by death allowed to the Sanhedrin by the law of Moses were by stoning, burning, beheading, and strangling. The Romans took away this privilege, and no one could be put to death without their sanction. Now, dismembering on the battlefield, sure, cutting off the heads and necks and whatever, but as a legal punishment, I questioned that. Same thing with the burning and strangling. In a fight, sure, but in as a legal punishment, doesn't seems to overstep the things in some ways. But the 71 sects. Well, it's thought that the Jews would be 71 sects. And remember, this word Nazi was 100 years ago used as a slur for even Jews. The ruling families that were mostly Jewish families, still are mostly Jewish families, their heads or their people that used their authority were called Nazis. But so were the other whatever. But this was largely more or less a racial slur because of something, in Eastern Europe. The people in Eastern Europe was using this before the NSDAP. So don't think that it's short for National Socialist, how do you say it? But anyways, it's not short for NSDAP. It's the National Socialist German Worker Party. It's not short for that. The small Sanhedrin was a judicial court appointed by the Great Sanhedrin and had 23 members and a present excellency. Their time of meeting was on Monday and Thursday, which were stated market days. A smaller court of 3 judges tried petty offenses against the person or property. Now, it's said that the Christians have 72 sects, and the Muslimin have 72 sects, and one totally right path, which is basically just the acceptance of the Quran and the Sunnah. So directly what the Prophet has taught. Now, people who to one degree or another have turned it into something else, then that's what's meant by the sects. Because we can get into details why the Christians and the Jews were not the faiths of the people who they call their prophets. I've already gone to some of that in my commentary, but denarius, page 464. The value of the denarius penny was 15 cents, which being the price of a day's labor, and also of a Roman soldier, would vary in value from time to time. Okay, so 15 cents is the price of a day's labor. So that's cheaper than I thought it was. I thought like 50 cents was like $20, $30. So we're talking even, When first coined in Rome, BCE 269, it was worth 15 cents, but it was reduced by Nero to 12 cents. Way to Jericho, page 466, about 8 miles from Bethany on the road to Jericho, which passes through what was probably the ancient valley of the brook Cherith. It's hard to tell whether they mean a tau or a theth in some of these cases because they're not showing the letters. Now Wadi Kelt. There are ruins of a monastery or inn on the right-hand side of the road, now called the Khan of the Good Samaritan, and on the opposite side of the brook or wadi, there are other ruins not named. From the road a few rods east of the ruins, there is a glimpse of the Jordan Valley, the course of the river, the Dead Sea, and the Moab Mountains. The place has always been noted as very unsafe to travelers, and is so now, and it is likely that on this account it was selected as the locality of the parable of the Good Samaritan. The region is called desert or wilderness, and is without dwellings except the huts or tents of the shepherds who watch the flocks and herds, which find excellent pasture on the rocky hills and in the winding ravines a great part of the year. There are very few trees, many small shrubs, and in the winter an abundance of flowers. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho is a very steep, descending nearly 4,000 feet in 15 miles, and abounds in smooth rock and loose stones. both unsafe to the foot, both of man and beast. Sometimes in the way below the ruin, the gorge is narrow, and walled in on both sides by almost perpendicular rocks, 500 feet high, in the bottom of which the stream flows, or rather rushes in a continuous cascade or foaming rapids for miles together. The holes are caves of the hermits of the Middle Ages, begin a few miles above Jericho, and are now occupied by birds only. Some of them have been examined and found to contain dust and bones ankle deep. No books or inscriptions of any kind, except a few names and extracts from the scriptures, have been noticed. Here and there, as the way approaches the plain of Jericho, there are ruins of chapels on the heights where the monks met for public services. The plain of Jericho appears from the road very level and dotted in many places by green clumps of vegetation marking springs and lines of trees also following the brooks, the broadest being along the course of the Jordan. Bethany, page 466, is on the Mount of Olives, a mile and a half from Jerusalem, east, and is now called El Lazaria, Lazarus's village. It is in a hollow, and the tumble-down huts are on a slope. Around and below an old tower, which is called after Lazarus, of course, there is also a tomb of Lazarus, into which you descend by 26 steps. The orchards near the village grow olives, almonds, pomegranates, figs, and carobs. While there are a few oaks, the people who live there are busy with their orchards or flocks, and also in the manufacture of articles of curiosity and slight use, including a number of antiquities which they sell to travelers. Fountain in Peraa, page 480. The east side of the Jordan is almost unknown, scarcely one place in 10 that were known in Bible times being now identified. There are few inhabited villages, but many tribes of Bedouins living in black tents, whose numbers must have very great, yet far below the multitudes who filled the cities in the time of the Greeks and the Romans. The book on the giant cities of Rawson gives a glimpse of the many wonderful ruins which are found in every part of the land from the Jordan to the desert. Captain Burton of the Mecca pilgrimage fame lately visited the Ledja, the Trakan of the Romans, where he found many ruined cities in which were many fine houses cut in the solid rock, and he gives a description of an extensive cave, one of those mentioned by Josephus. The fountain drawn here is near the ancient Heshbon. Now, many more people that would have been European or whatever would have gone on the pilgrimage and just not published accounts and stuff about it. But drachma, page 487. The value of the drachm varied from 14 to 17 cents, the kind of a talent of which it was a division, and there were 3 varieties of talent: Attic, Phoenician, Ptolemaic, high priest, page 507. The dress of the Jewish high priest and the breastplate have been the subject of much inquiry, critical examination of the Hebrew text, and investigation into the manners, customs, and costume of the ancients, but without as yet determining, beyond a doubt, any one particular. The breastplate was symbolical of the 12 tribes, and the placing of the 12 engraved gems in their several positions was a sign of the presence of the 12 tribes for Yahweh. You know, you don't pronounce the J as a J, you say it as a Y, and you say the V as a W. Josephus gives a detailed description of the garments and their symbolical meanings in Antiquities 377. The holy garments were particular to and worn only by the high priest, and certain pieces were put on only the great day of atonement, when he went into the holy of holies to appear before the presence of Jehovah for the people. Ephraim, page 508, now called El Tegebe. The village is built on a conical hill and completely walled in about 12 miles northeast of Jerusalem. There are some ruins of antiquity, and the site is very favorable for fine prospects. and it is mentioned in both Old and New Testament, Joshua 18:23, Judges 6:11, Micah 1:10, John 11:54, Ark of Wilson at Jerusalem, page 528. This is an ark on the west of the temple area wall, opposite the double gate of the Chatan. It is an arched room which has been lined with cement or plaster and used as a cistern in some age later than that of its first construction. Exploration shows that the stones of the walls of this room, which were traced to a depth of 44 feet below the spring of the ark, are stones similar to those in the upper part of the wall of the harem at the Jews' wheeling place. The chamber is now filled up with stones and rubbish, nearly 40 feet, on the top of which the cement is laid. There are several other small arched chambers in the same vicinity, which were used in their day for stores or for water. Jericho, page 536. There are 3 distinct localities at Jericho which claim our attention as the sites referred to in ancient history. The village of Er-Reha is of least interest among the 3 and can scarcely date before the Crusades, unless it may be one of the places mentioned in the book of Joshua, perhaps Gilgal. Jericho of Joshua's time would then have been at Rasha Foundation, now called Ain Sultan, and the Jericho of the New Testament time at the foot of the hills where the brook Cherith, now Wadi Kelt, enters the plain. The name in Hebrew means a fragrant place, and the abundance of flowering shrubs in the rainy season, even now, gives some color to the title. Josephus describes it as surrounded by gardens, orchards, and palm groves in his day, and says that it is not easy to light on any climate equal to it. The Romans held it as an important town, and Herod fortified it, naming the fort Cyprus after his mother, and a town after his brother Phasaelus. He is also said to have built a new town a little north in the same plain, which was also named Phasaelis. Vespasian made it the head of a toparchy. It was destroyed during the siege of Jerusalem. The ruins are mostly foundations and heaps of rubbish, which have been quite extensively examined lately without yielding any valuable antiquity. 6 miles across the plain on the west bank of the Jordan are the ruins of what is now called the Jews' Castle, an old monastery of the time of the Crusades. It was once a grand pile of well-built cloisters and chapel, and is now quite an interesting ruin. The vaults are large and roomy, and would make excellent storehouses if there was anything there to store. What little grain that is raised in the plain is carried away by the farmers who live among the hills, where the climate is cooler as soon as it is harvested. Jerusalem, page 671. The view of the city from Olivet, looking over the Garden of Gethsemane, is the finest, showing the city to its best advantage. At that distance, it is a beautiful sight, with its domes, towers, walls, well-built convents, and English church. A nearer inspection reveals the utter neglect of streets and of the walls of houses fronting on the streets. The only pleasant places in the city are in the courtyards of houses, are in the square before the English consulate and church, and in the temple area. The streets are all narrow, and many places arched over are shaded with awnings or mats, and are very badly paved or not paved at all. The rain makes a torrent in the middle of the way, and no one takes the trouble to clean the street sweeping being unheard of. See page 544. The city is small, measuring a mile and a half by 3/4, but there is scarcely a place in the world which has given scholars and investigations so much severe labor, with so little result. It is almost completely an enigma. After so many years of the most careful exploration, the descriptions of the Old Testament writers wouldn't call it the Old Testament, they call it the Tanakh, and what they call the Old Testament has some misleading translations, and it's reordered to have a different effect. But they were not very minute, but those of Josephus were very exact and particular, while of many points there are accounts by other writers of antiquity, so that it seems almost marvelous that there should have been any difficulty, until we were reminded that during the Crusades, as well as the earlier ages succeeding the destruction of the city by Titus, Jerusalem was regarded as a peculiarly sacred city, and by the Christian residents desired to have every event that is mentioned in the Bible as having happened in or near it located and honored with some appropriate memorial of tomb, chapel, or church, and thenceforth, when the exact location had been lost, another was adopted and consecrated. And among